Session 3 on the unfair advantage. Today we're going to talk about rejection. Everybody hates rejection, but the reality is rejection happens to the best of us, but it doesn't have to get the best of us. I'm going to teach you in this session how to turn rejection into redirection into God's greater purpose for your life. It could be that the very unfair advantage God has for your life is the rejection that you've experienced. That's what happened with our guy, Joseph. Give you a little recap. Joseph is one of 12 children from Jacob. He's the 11th son, and he has this dream from God, and nobody believes in him, but he keeps dreaming. And then the story escalates, and we see it in chapter 37, and it says it like this. It says, "So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But when they saw him in the distance, and before they reached him, they plotted to kill him." You think you've been rejected? I don't know if you've ever been really desired to be killed by other people. They plotted to kill him. They said, "Here comes that dreamer," they said to one another. "Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him, and then we'll see what comes of this dream, of his dreams." And then it says like this. "So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe that he was wearing, and they took him and threw him in a cistern. The cistern was empty and there was no water in it." I think it's important to see in this passage, it says it was empty. And if you've ever gone through a season of rejection, you know it is a very empty season. It's a very discouraging season. There's no life, it feels like, in that season. And I don't know what kind of rejection you've experienced, but I know it happens to all of us. And I want to challenge you on this, that you can live unoffendable in a very offensive world. And where our world is out to hurt us, you can live in such a way that you can get better throughout the scenarios that are hurting you, instead of constantly walking in bitterness and resentment and feeling like you're always being put down. No, there's a purpose in the midst of whatever rejection you are going through right now. Often when God gives you a promise, that you got to understand this, that the path looks nothing like what you had thought. And many times that path is rejection. For Joseph, the promise was that he would rule and reign, but the path was his brother's rejection. And I think many times rejection is the very thing God uses to move you to the greater thing that he has for your life. Let me give you the story. It's in the book, but let me kind of break it down for you even a little bit more. Is that what I call the chain of events of how God used my story and used my rejection to really bring me to the place that I'm at right now. I got saved at 16 years old, had this encounter with God that forever changed my life. And I remember being called into ministry, knowing I wanted to give my life for the gospel. And during that time, I got back, I was starting my 11th grade year, and I remember sitting there in class just miserable. I remember being in history class going, "God, I don't want to be in here learning history. I want to go make history. I want to change the world." And the Lord gave me this challenge. He said, "Aaron, start where you are at." Well, I was at a small little Christian school, and I was like, well, I guess I'll make this my mission field right now. And I started ministering to my friends, and I started a Bible study on Wednesday mornings. I'll never forget seeing that group of teenagers show up about an hour before school starts, and the vision was coming to a reality. It was so cool. See lives getting transformed. Well, the principal at the time, he didn't like me, and he had good reasons not to like me. I was a really bad kid for years and years. I was in detention all the time, lots of struggles, always suspended. I got suspended multiple times. And he pulled me in his office one day and he said, "Aaron, if you're going to run this Bible study and you're going to try to help these other kids know about God, then I'm going to hold you to a higher standard. And if you get one more suspension from this school, you are getting expelled." Well, to get a suspension, you had to get 3 detentions. So I knew I was walking on eggshells for the rest of that semester. So I had about 4 months before school was out. When he told me this, the Bible study was growing. My influence was growing. And during that time, I got one detention. Then I got another one. And then about a month before school is out, I got my 3rd detention. I ended up having to go to in-school suspension. And I remember sitting there in school suspension, so nervous. He's going to kick me out. That's what he told me he would do. And I remember my friends coming up to me afterwards going, there's no way. They're not going to make you do in-school suspension and then kick you out. And at the end of the day, after I'd served the whole day in-school suspension, he pulls me to his office and he expels me from the school. I remember I called my mom and she was kind of a mama bear at that moment. She came over trying to defend her son, but I had no ground to stand on. I was expelled. And for the last month of my 11th grade year, I had to go to the local public school and sit by myself at the lunch table. I didn't know anybody. I went through a real season of depression, really frustrated, kind of angry at God. I had just submitted my life to the Lord, been used by him in ministry, and then I have this worst scenario happen. I felt like Joseph. The people around me had rejected me. God had forsaken me, and it was an empty season. Well, I decided that I would finish up my 11th grade year there. And for my 12th grade year, I would dive into my youth ministry, serve in that way because I knew there was still a call of God on my life. And I would do the local junior college where I could do college classes at the same time. We call it dual enrollment in Florida. So I did dual enrollment my last year. Ended up starting a Bible study at my house through my youth ministry, really able to be equipped in ministry. And then when I graduated from high school, I actually had a year of college already done and then went to college. Well, in college, I studied missions. And on the day that I graduated, a man walked up to me, the head of our missions department, and said, Aaron, I have an opportunity for you to go overseas and run a missions agency in Sri Lanka. It's a small island off the coast of India that had just been decimated by a tsunami. And I remember thinking, oh man, this is only possible that I'm able to go on this opportunity and seize this opportunity because I graduated in 3 years at that university instead of 4. The only reason I graduated in 3 years is because I had a year of college done for my senior year because I got expelled. And I remember getting on that airplane going, I wish I could give that principal a hug. Little did he know that his rejection was what redirected me to the greater purpose that God had for my life. Can't give you all the details because we don't have a lot of time for it. But even since then, businesses that I've started and what we've done, we've been able to really see how it's been just a constant chain of events, all that pointed back to that one expulsion that happened my end of my 11th grade year. I would have never thought that one moment of rejection could have set me up for decades now of influence and impact. You have no clue how the rejection you're experiencing from men will lead to God's redirection in your life. Rejection is a great resource if you'll lean in to God's plan during it. So what's our response? Remember, I told you in the first session that it's not automatic. It's not automatic that just because some person rejects you, whether that's a relationship or whether it's a business or whether even it's a friend or a church, if that rejection turning into redirection is not automatic. Here's how you determine if it's used for God's purposes. Is with the rejection, are you going to get bitter or are you going to get better? Let me say it again. Are you getting bitter or are you getting better? I remember I had a moment where I had a choice to make that time where I was so frustrated, so depressed. And I thought, you know what? I don't know how God's going to use this, but I believe he will. And I'm going to work on getting better. So what do you do during those seasons? You guard your heart. That's what the scriptures tell us. They say, above all else, guard your heart. It's interesting in Joseph's story that he had so much rejection from his family, from his fathers, but throughout his whole story, all the way through chapter 50, we never see a scenario where he got bitter, resentful, angry. He recognized that, you know what? If God was allowing the rejection, then there's a purpose to it. Our part is to guard our heart, protect our heart from getting angry, bitter, offended. I'm telling you, it's the offense that can actually get you rooted in bitterness and keep you from what God has for your future. So what do you do when you're rejected? You guard your heart, and then you figure out, how can you get better in this next season? I know you didn't ask for it. You didn't ask to get fired. You didn't ask for that relationship to end. You didn't ask for the rejection when it comes to your parents. You didn't ask for it, but you can learn something from it. I've always heard it said that sometimes you win and sometimes you learn. And I've realized through all of the rejection in my life, it's some of the greatest learning moments of your life. So here's my question for you is what is the rejection that you've gone through? Maybe what's that rejection that has most defined your life? I want you to talk about it amongst your group right there. Be honest, be vulnerable. What is it that has most defined you? Who's that person that has rejected you the most? Here's the real scenario and real question you need to ask. Have you released the bitterness from that person or that church or that organization or that boss? Have you released it to the Lord? Because you can't move forward by constantly looking backwards at the same time. You need to move on and you need to get it out of your heart. And what do you need to do? That's a great question to ask. What do you need to do to move past the hurt that you're in right now? And if you've been doing this for a certain amount of time, then I want you to explain to your group, how has God used the rejection to be a chain of events that'll lead you or has led you toward your ultimate direction? I've realized in my life, many times I don't know it until years and sometimes even decades later that, wow, that rejection had a purpose. And I want you to know this, that your rejection, that what you've gone through had a purpose. There is a reason behind it. I've heard someone say it this way, that when it comes to that relationship, that they didn't reject you, God rejected them for you. And that's awesome to think. You know what? God said no to me staying in that school so that he could move me towards what he has for me next. And I want you to know it's the same with your life. Rejection is God's way of redirecting your life. Embrace it, learn from it, guard your heart, and watch how he'll use it for a great purpose.